So let's, it's still, okay, now it's going. So let's start again with your definition of open science and its components.
Okay. So my definition of open science is that it is the open availability of data and methodology in order to reproduce research and in order to create new research projects without starting from scratch. So being able to use data that's already been generated and being able to use components of that data to start a new research project. And this data is shareable in the United States or really worldwide. It's not just a US kind of thing, it's a worldwide sharing of data.
How is that significant, or what are the benefits to researchers and institutions?
Well, the benefits are that there are differences around the world in certain research projects. So from a medical standpoint, there can be, I mean, we generally have standards of specimens that we use. So if we are doing testing on mice in early stages, there's a standard mouse that is used throughout the testing, and it has a certain genetic DNA makeup, and that DNA makeup of a mouse is then used throughout the world. But when it comes to the stage of doing testing on patients, then there is much variability between patients around the world. So we may not have access to certain types of people, and using open data and sharing this research allows researchers around the world to then do testing so that, let's say we're developing a new pharmaceutical, a drug, then we can see that in all populations it behaves the same. So it's not just US centric on, you know, white people or black people or just certain Asian people. It can be tested globally, and that then it can be approved on a global level rather than just on a US centric level. So in the medical world, it's really important. It's because of the effects on medicine and maybe preventing pandemics in the future.
Can you give me an example of how the open data model has benefited medical research?
No, I can't give you well, I would say yes. And some of this open data really comes down to one of our first Nobel Prize winners was Brown and Goldstein. And they are the ones who discovered the mechanism for controlling cholesterol. So basically, they're the guys who made Lipitor possible. So statin drugs. But in their research, what they did for open science was that they developed a mouse that had a specific mouse. I want to, like, is it mice or mouse? A specific mouse that had the components necessary to accurately test cholesterol levels and the reaction with the drug. And that mouse, it has a particular name, is still used today and can be reproduced today on a continual basis. It's not the same mouse, but the DNA, the genetic makeup of that mouse that originally used in their research that got them the Nobel Prize that developed Lipitor and all the statin drugs is still being used today because of what they did. And that is basically an open science result or benefit that's happened. So the Nobel Prize made that kind of a worldwide, known throughout the world. But the open science specific piece of that was the mouse itself. And of course, their research and their data was made public, but specifically more testing could be done and development could be done on statin drugs and cholesterol without starting from the very beginning. They could start with that particular mouse and then change the DNA in order to continue testing on whatever other research projects other people wanted to do. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does. So if one more clarification, so the DNA composition of this mouse, that was made public, that profile was made available to any
Yes.
researcher. So that's a standard benchmark for testing
Yes.
against this particular DNA. How would another researcher then? And they would have the data from this one study, but they would also have, if they wanted to do a new study, could they then take this standard mouse DNA and use that as the benchmark?
Absolutely, yes. And then if they needed to tweak the DNA in that mouse to test something in particularly different, and that's done all the time, they could do that instead of starting from scratch. And basically then they would be creating a new benchmark of mouse, but originally based on this statin drug mouse.
I see.
That makes sense? So it's,
Yeah.
they're able to create different models, but that creates the benchmark for every other researcher.
I see. Could you do me one favor before the next question? Could you
Sure.
tip your webcam forward just a little bit so you're
Sure.
not so low?
Mm-hmm.
Great. Okay, so what are the potential drawbacks or concerns that people have about open science and about open data in particular?
Well, I think the drawbacks are that people are nervous that they won't be able to reproduce the study. And then they'll be able to come back and say, well, your study wasn't, we couldn't validate your study because we weren't able to reproduce it. That's one drawback. Two, another drawback is that most research institutions, which tend to be universities, there's a proprietary aspect to that research. So they like to take that research and then, trot it around and say, okay, is this potentially a Nobel Prize winning research or, other prize winning research? So there's this level of, when do we release the data? When do we release the methodology? Because we're trying to, go after a particular award, and we actually own this information. When are we willing to give it up to others? So there's that level. But then there's also the side of, which is kind of the argument with open science, is that a lot of the research projects, maybe not all, but a lot, are government funded. So there is a mandate that the methodology and the data is made available. And so there's no getting around that. But the key is that not all research projects are government funded. And that's kind of the misunderstanding that a lot of people have, is that they think that some institutions or the majority of institutions are all government funded, and they really aren't. There are so many other funding mechanisms that don't have to go public and don't have to be made available. So it just depends on what the end result of the usage of the data is intended. If it's funded by a pharmaceutical, is it funded by a particular donor because they want to cure cancer or cure a particular disease or go after this or that? I mean, there's a lot of dependencies involved as well. So there's politics involved in this in the short run, but there's ways to get around that for the good of humanity. And I think that for the good of humanity is kind of winning out in most institutions, because we don't want every institution to be doing the same research when we all could be working together to cure cancer or cure this disease or create this drug for, something. So, there's that mentality that it's now coming around, because there's just, there's not a plethora of money out there for universities to just keep going and going and going, because there's, an unending pot of gold that, are going to fund all these researchers and everything else that's needed to fund a university.
So when we're talking about these drawbacks or objections that people have, how serious is the idea of, if my research is public, then I'll therefore get more scrutiny? Is that a serious concern, or won't it be more likely to incent them to be more careful?
I think it's more of the latter. I don't think it's a serious concern about that it's not going to be reproducible, because scientists are very structured, and everything always is, because they have so many people coming through their lab, postdocs and students, that everything is very structured. I think it's more about that they really want their research out there, so people will be able to reuse the data and the methodology to really make something of it.
I see. Do you think in general that research is trending more towards an open model?
Yes.
And can you just encapsulate the reasons again? Because you said that it about duplication and available funds. I'd like to get another take of you explaining why it's increasing and why that's a good thing.
Well, I think one of the main reasons that it's increasing is that because of the way technology has come into the labs. And that is, in the olden days, they used to all have lab notebooks, and they would write everything down on a lab notebook. But now everything is electronic. So they have electronic lab notebooks. And with the electronic lab notebook, they have the ability to link their lab notebook, say here in Dallas, Texas, with a lab in Tennessee or Georgia or Washington or China, wherever, and be able to share with colleagues, and their colleague across the country or around the world can say, it's just like they were in the lab with you. They can consult with you. So that's why I think it's, really going to be more of a trend for open science, because we're already in that age of using technology to make things more efficient. Because the whole lab notebook model, what happens with that is those lab notebooks, they go on a shelf. And when they're on a shelf and you run out of space in someone's office, somebody who doesn't know better may come into that office and say, what do we need all these old lab notebooks for? And pitch them. And that is where the library comes in to have a lot of importance of maintaining old lab notebooks. And with this modern day invention of electronic lab notebooks, we have to look at how are we storing the data, and are we backing up these lab notebooks, so that if something catastrophic were to happen on a particular server, that all would not be lost. So yes, I think it's a trend, that open science is a trend, and that, in the next 5 to 10 years, we're not even going to think about it. It's just going to be, as prominent as electronic journals and books are today. You just expect to be able to click on an article and see it. I think open science will become an expectation.
I see. You mentioned the role of libraries. Can you summarize how you think libraries are going to need to change in the face of this trend?
Sure. How libraries are going to need to change? Well, they should be changing now. And that is that they should be embracing technology, learning about institutional repositories, if not in control of the institutional repository. They should be applying metadata to the data that the researchers are developing. They should be really working with researchers so that not every single researcher is naming a field something different. Common named fields should be, just standard, so that there's not all these differences, and so that it's easy to find the data. So yeah, it's great that we can store the data and it's backed up and it's electronic, but if you can't find it and you can't sort it and you can't reuse it again, then it's worthless. So I think the role of the library is to really hit that home and say, how can the library and librarians use their skills of organization, project planning, cataloging in order to get this data in order, stored, so that it will be safe and it can be found again and reusable. So I think that that's the role of the libraries and librarians, is to be in there. I don't think that a pure IT person can do that, because they know all about the servers and all about internet traffic and all of that kind of stuff, which is great, but they're not going to know all about the metadata and the importance of accessibility. And that's really where libraries fall into it, is accessibility, metadata. Those are key factors.
Great. So the people who actually work in the library, what kind of skill sets are they going to have to acquire, or if they've already acquired them, how are they going to increase their capabilities to do all this? What's your advice to a junior librarian in your own institution, or someone you're meeting who's starting? What do they need to become good at?
They need to become good at data management. And that seems like, oh, what does that mean? Well, data management can be a really big thing or it can be a really small thing. It just depends on your environment. But I think that it's really important that a beginning librarian or a librarian who is in the middle of this change, they really need to understand data management and what they can do in order to manage that data appropriately. But, they're not going to be giving up any of the skills that they have used prior or that they learned prior in library school. All of those basic skills that we all went through in library school and learned and practiced, we still need those. Those are the foundation of librarianship, and they're very, very valid today. My library is a total digital library, but I still need librarians who have those basic foundations of librarianship, but they're going to apply them in different ways in a digital environment. So that's what they really need to understand, is that basic skill set, nobody else has. Only librarians have that. And so we can apply that to this open science model, and in any change that's happening in your library and in your institution, because it really is all about managing the data and managing projects, and making it all about accessibility and making it all about organized information and a common vocabulary or data sets that you can access over and over again. And that's really where we normally fall down, is we have a bunch of data that nobody can get to anymore. But it's there, but nobody can get to it because they don't know how to get to it. It's not organized in any way.
Great. Let's go. You talked about intellectual property issues earlier, and I'd like you to expand on that a little bit. With open science, with the methodology and with the data, and the findings being now accessible to everyone, whether it's government funded or privately funded, what are the valid concerns regarding intellectual property ownership for these studies?
Right. I think I don't know that there is any, to my knowledge, I don't know that there's any good way to establish the intellectual property in open science. I think about copyright and how, we've had the Copyright Clearance Center, and then what's the other copyright organization? It's real easy. Forget what it is. It's kind of an open copyright. I can't remember the name of it, but anyway, do you remember the name of it?
No, I don't. No.
It's at the.
You're not talking about Creative Commons licensing?
Yes, Creative Commons, exactly that. I would hope that there would be some sort of a Creative Commons type of control over intellectual property in open science. But I frankly don't know if there is. And I think that really is a big issue in a lot of I know it's a big issue in my institution, just because we have this reputation. We have 6 Nobel laureates, and so that becomes, intellectual property becomes a bigger issue. The more you have this reputation of award-winning research. So I simply don't know the answer, but I think it's a big deal for my institution, and I think that, in my opinion, I think that's what keeps my institution from going on the fast forward road to open science and open access.
I see. Do you think, is there anyone working on the Creative Commons model for this kind of, for research and data? Because it sounds like it could be put in Creative Commons, but
Right.
I may need to explore that in the article a little bit more.
Right. I don't know for sure.
So this hinges obviously on both economic implications and reputation. So with open science growing for educational institutions and researchers, what are the economic implications? And that it goes to funding, it goes to, it goes mainly to funding, but surely the end result of this research is some kind of procedure or product that will make somebody money at some point.
Right. I think right now for the institution, it's reputation. For the individual researcher, it's reputation and economics. So for instance, when somebody wins the Nobel Prize, that's $1 million prize. And that $1 million doesn't go to the institution, it goes to the researcher. So any award like that, or anything similar to like that, it's a monetary award. It doesn't go to the institution, it goes to the researcher. But it's the reputation that really goes to the institution, and then of course to the researcher. So I really think it's more of a reputation issue, because a lot of times my institution is known as the Harvard of the South. So that's reputation. That's not economic, that's reputation. So other institutions may or may not agree with that, but other institutions are going to have a reputation regarding something else. They may be, I can't think of any other examples, but I think it's really about reputation.
What about the economics of products developed from this research? Because Lipitor, you mentioned earlier, is a commercial product. It's making some pharma company a lot of money.
Sure.
What's the implication of an open science model? What would prevent someone from using or abusing open science to create a competing product or create an economic disruptor?
Almost every institution has a kind of a spin-off department. I say spin-off because it's loosely related to the university, and that department is their sole job is to go after patents. So if a researcher thinks they have something that's unique and that is patentable, they will issue a patent immediately, or they'll go after a patent for that researcher. So even if it's open, it will be open science in the end when they finish that research. The patent will have already been acquired. So go ahead.
So someone could see the research chemical composition of what they came up with, and anything related to the IP, that's patented, and they could read the patent, of course, because patents are public, but they would, by definition, not be able to infringe on that patent, even if they had the research.
Correct.
Do you think that's sufficient to answer people's objections?
Probably not. But you know, they think about, I mean, it's pharmaceutical industry. I mean, I think that's really where, I mean, well, it's not always pharmaceuticals. I mean, we do medical devices as well. And that's normally, there's not a ton of research that's done on medical devices. The research is mainly for pharmaceutical stuff.
Sure.
So yeah.
Okay, interesting. Just a couple more. So how do you think open science will change scientific research itself and methodology itself, since we now have a way of opening up our notebooks and our process and our data to others? How do you think it will change the way we do research?
Well, I think it has potentially will speed up the research cycle. Instead of it taking 10, 15, 20 years to, you know, develop a new drug for something, or, you know, whatever it may be, I think that research cycle will speed up because there will be more collaboration instead of just depending upon who happens to come through your own lab. There'll be more collaboration around the world to help it speed up, and there'll be more testing, so that especially in the United States, as there are regulatory entities, they will then look and see, oh, this is the rigorous research that's gone through with this particular drug, and you know, all of this stuff that maybe that will speed up as well.
Okay. So I'm going to veer off just a little bit, since we have an international implications of this, that a scientist in the U.S. and a scientist in China can see each other's research. Are there other political or geographic implications that come into play? Do governments who are rivals in some way, are they apt to meddle or prevent open science from going forward? What is the political landscape, in your opinion, that as it pertains to open science?
I don't think there's much, because you know, there are so many universities who are partnering or who have campuses over in different countries, who are partnering in China with the University of whatever in China, or in, you know, Peru, or, you know, name your country. I don't think there will be a large political issue, because there are already existing partnerships that are widely known. I mean, like, if for Yale, Princeton, Harvard, you know, USC, UCLA, UT Southwestern. I mean, we have partnerships. Everybody has partnerships all over the world. And what that means is that researchers can come and go. Our researchers can go there. Their researchers can come here and work on different projects and collaborate. And I mean, it's sort of like how student visas work. You know, a student from China can come over here for a limited period of time and then they go back, and the same, and vice versa. So I don't see it as, I think it's still an educational component issue. I think people are looking at it, and I'm talking mainly from the medical side, because that's what I know, is that, you know, when they talk about researchers and students coming back and forth, I mean, we're talking about people who potentially can cure or develop new drugs for big diseases. And so who wants to say, no, you cannot do that because of, you know, political reasons, because of a nuclear bomb or whatever it may be? They would rather have the cure for cancer than, you know, say no to because there's an issue with a nuclear warhead or something. I mean, I'm just making that up, but
Sure, sure. So the last question I have is kind of an open-ended. What will this open science discussion look like in, say, 5 or 10 years?
I think it will become the norm, really. I think it will just be a normal thing, because I think we will see results, more results of positive results from open science and collaboration, that, and we will find a solution to the intellectual property issue, and that it will become a normal thing. Or I think it's a two-sided coin. Or that will, I don't think it could go terribly wrong. I mean, I just don't see it that way, because I haven't seen open access go terribly wrong over all of these years. So I don't really think that open science can go terribly wrong. I mean, you could look at the PLOS, Public Library of Science. They've done really, really well and published a lot of really, really good research. So I don't really see it as anything that's going to go terribly wrong. I think in 5 to 10 years, I think it will just be the norm and everybody will be doing it.
Okay. Great. Well, thank you. We actually did almost exactly 45 minutes.
Great. So I hope you got what you were looking for.
I think I did. If I have any other questions, I'll probably send you an email early next week.
Sure.
And just follow-up questions, and I'll let you obviously see the draft when it's done, and these and the video clips that we choose to pull out and use.
So I'm curious, how did you get my name and how did you find me?
Let me see. I think there was a list that my publisher at Library Journal. Yes. You were on a list of potential resources from Library Journal.
Okay.
And
right.
I've been doing this series now for almost a year on open access, and I've been mining that pretty thoroughly. Some people are a little tired of hearing from me now. But no, there's only 3 more to go in this series, and it's Dove Medical is sponsoring it.
Fantastic.
But they've been remarkably unobtrusive. They've requested gently that we mention them once in a while, but I haven't slanted any of my stuff to their. I mean, it's they want public awareness, and there's a new microsite going up with these articles and videos, and I think their hope is that their name will be identified with open access in general.
Great.
That they'll benefit from the reputation, and that their goal is really to disseminate a better awareness among the library community.
Right, right. Well, very good. Well, I'm in the process of developing an open access policy for UT Southwestern. to hopefully get it mandated at UT Southwestern, and that would be a first in the UT system to have that done. So I'm hoping that will happen in the next few months. So
Great. Well, good luck with that.
yeah, thank you.
You're welcome. Well, have a great evening, and thank you
Okay.
for all your time. I appreciate it.
Sure, no problem. Thank you,
Okay,
John.
will do. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.